Arrival with empty hands. Have you ever stood in a place where everyone speaks, but none of the words seem to belong to you? Imagine landing in a new American city with one suitcase, a tired heart, broken confidence, and English that only works inside your head. This video is about starting from zero, about climate shock, culture shock, love, marriage, family, and learning English the slow human way, through a real story. If you feel stuck, tired, or ready to quit, this story might quietly pull you back. I arrived in this city 2 weeks ago. No dramatic music. No movie-style welcome. Just cold air hitting my face in a way I wasn't ready for. The kind of cold that doesn't scream, but sits there, calm and sharp, reminding you that you are not home anymore. My hands were empty, not just because I carried one bag, but because my English felt empty too. You know that feeling, when you studied English for years, but suddenly your mouth forgets everything the moment real life looks at you. At the airport, people spoke fast, casual English. Not textbook English. Not listening test English. Real English. The kind that slides, shortens, eats sounds for breakfast. My brain froze. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. When stress hits, your working memory shrinks. That's why you forget simple words like receipt or gate, even though you knew them yesterday. It's not because you're bad at English. It's because your nervous system is busy asking one question: am I safe here? The city itself felt unfamiliar. The sky looked wider. The wind behaved differently. In my old country, weather followed habits. Here, climate feels like personality. Morning sun, afternoon rain, evening cold. People talk about weather in America not because they're boring, but because climate shapes daily life. And suddenly, weather words weren't vocabulary anymore. They were survival tools. Windy. Dry. Freezing. Simple words. Important words. The first night, I stayed in a small room. The heater made strange noises, like it was also adjusting to a new life. I lay on the bed and realized something uncomfortable. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Social silence. No one to talk to. No language to lean on. This is when your brain becomes loud. Studies show that isolation amplifies self-criticism. Your inner voice gets meaner when no one interrupts it. Mine kept repeating, "You don't belong here." The next morning, I went outside to buy food. A simple goal. Buy breakfast. But this is where English becomes real. You don't practice English. You need it. The menu had words I knew, but arranged in ways I didn't expect. My eyes scanned fast, my mouth stayed closed. When it was my turn, my heart rate jumped. This is a classic fight-or-flight response. Language anxiety is physical, not intellectual. sweaty palms, tight chest, short breath. I ordered slowly, very slowly. I would like this. The cashier waited. No pressure. No judgment. Just normal patience. Something clicked. In neuroscience, they call this a corrective experience. Your brain expects danger. Reality gives safety. That's how fear starts to loosen. Walking back, I noticed something strange. Americans don't rush conversations the way you think. They rush tasks, yes. But emotionally, many interactions are simple, direct, calm. That helped. It made English feel less like a test and more like a bridge. Still shaky. Still narrow. But there. At night, I thought about why starting from zero feels so heavy. Because zero is honest. Zero means no titles, no history, no shortcuts. And your English reflects that. You can't hide behind advanced words. You use basic sentences. Childlike sentences. I don't understand. Can you repeat? Linguists say this is actually how real fluency starts. Not with complexity, but with clarity. I reminded myself of something important. Babies don't learn language fast. They learn it deeply, slowly, through repetition, emotion, context. That's what I was doing now, even if my ego didn't like it. I wasn't failing at English. I was returning to the beginning. That first week, I made a rule. Speak even when imperfect. Listen even when tired. Read signs. Read faces. Read silence. This city was teaching me English without a classroom. And every small interaction, every thank you, every have a good day, added weight to words that once felt empty. Starting from zero is not romantic. It's awkward, humbling, but it's also clean. No fake confidence. No pretending. Just real life, real English, real emotion. And somehow, that made me feel closer to the language than ever before. By the end of that week, nothing magical happened. My English didn't suddenly improve. But my fear shrank. And that's the real first step. Because when fear lowers, learning begins. Quietly. Slowly. Honestly. Starting from zero doesn't mean you have nothing. It means you finally stopped carrying what wasn't helping you. Climate shock hits first. The first real teacher I met in America wasn't a person. It was the weather. And it didn't care about my feelings, my plans, or my English level. One morning, the sun felt warm enough to give me false hope. By afternoon, cold wind cut through my jacket like it knew I was new here. By evening, rain arrived without warning. In that moment, I understood something simple but powerful. Climate in America is not background. It's part of daily conversation, daily decisions, and daily English. Back home, weather was predictable. You dressed once and forgot about it. Here, climate changes your mood, your schedule, and your vocabulary. People don't say, "How are you?" just to be polite. Very often they say, "Cold today, huh?" or "Crazy weather, right?" At first, I thought it was small talk. Then I realized, it's connection. Weather is safe English, easy English, emotional English. The shock wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Research shows that sudden climate changes increase stress levels, especially for newcomers. Your body is busy adapting, so your brain has less energy for language. That explained why my English felt worse on cold days. Not weaker, just slower. And that's okay. Language doesn't disappear. It waits. One morning, I stood outside trying to decide what to wear. Jacket or no jacket? This seems silly, but it forced me to think in English. It's chilly. It might rain. The wind is strong. These were not lessons from a book. These were survival sentences. When language connects to the body, cold skin, wet shoes, it sticks better. Neuroscience calls this embodied learning. Your brain remembers words linked to physical sensation more deeply. At a bus stop, I heard two strangers talk about the weather. Short sentences. Simple words. No grammar drama. It's colder than yesterday. Yeah, winter came early. That was it. But I replayed those sentences in my head like music. This is how listening practice should feel. Not forced. Not heavy. Just present. Climate also shapes lifestyle. In this city, people plan around weather. Walking paths change. Meeting times shift. Everyone checks forecasts. And forecasts are English lessons hiding in plain sight. Chance of rain. Feels like. Highs and lows. I started reading weather apps not to plan my day, but to read English without pressure. 5 minutes. Every day. Same structure. Repetition without boredom. There's a psychological trick here. When content is predictable, your brain relaxes. When your brain relaxes, comprehension increases. That's why children love the same story again and again. Weather reports became my daily story. Same characters. Different mood. One evening, I met someone special. We talked while walking, hands deep in pockets, breath visible in the air. The cold slowed the conversation. Pauses felt natural. Silence wasn't awkward. Climate changed communication speed. And slower speed is a gift when learning English. You hear sounds clearly. You think before speaking. You're allowed to be human. We talked about where we came from. about how winters felt different. I searched for words, used simple ones. In my country, winter is softer. Not perfect, but real. She understood. That moment taught me something important. Communication is not about perfect sentences. It's about shared experience. Cold fingers. Short daylight. Warm coffee. Culturally, Americans respect weather. They prepare for it. That mindset leaks into language learning too. You don't fight the climate. You adjust. You layer clothes. You slow down. The same with English. You don't force fluency. You layer vocabulary. You accept bad days. You continue. There were days I didn't want to speak. Cold makes you quiet. Studies show lower temperatures reduce social energy. I allowed myself silence. Listening days. Observation days. Language learning is not constant output. It's cycles. Input. Rest. Output. Repeat. I noticed families teaching children weather words early, because weather affects safety. That reminded me, English here is not academic. It's functional, emotional, protective. When you understand weather English, you understand life rhythms. When stores close. When schools delay. When people stay home. By the end of the second week, I could feel climate without checking apps. I could describe it without translating. It feels heavy today. That sentence came naturally. No grammar check. No fear. Just feeling turned into language. Climate shock didn't break me. It trained me. It slowed me down enough to hear English clearly. It taught me that language lives in the air, the wind, the pause between sentences. And when you stop fighting discomfort, learning starts to warm you from the inside. Weather doesn't ask if you're ready. Neither does life. But both teach you slowly how to adapt. Silent days, loud thoughts. There is a strange moment that happens after the excitement fades. Not when you arrive, not when you unpack, but a few days later, when the city keeps talking, and you still don't. Those were my silent days in America. Outside, everything was loud. Cars, stores, people laughing in English. Inside my head, the noise was even louder. Thoughts running fast, confidence running away. And my English? It stayed quiet, hiding somewhere deep. You might think silence means peace. But silence caused by fear is heavy. Research in psychology shows that when people feel linguistically excluded, the brain processes it like social rejection. The same areas light up as physical pain. That explains why my chest felt tight even when nothing bad happened. My brain wasn't reacting to English itself. It was reacting to the fear of being seen as not enough. During those days, I spoke less than 10 sentences a day. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because my mind rehearsed every sentence so many times that speaking felt dangerous. What if I say it wrong? What if they don't understand? What if they judge me? These thoughts weren't logical. They were automatic. Neuroscientists call this the threat prediction system. Your brain tries to protect you by stopping you from acting. The problem is, language learning requires action. So my brain and my goal were fighting each other. I remember standing in a grocery store aisle, holding the same product for almost a minute. I knew the word. I knew what I wanted. But I imagined the cashier asking a question I wouldn't understand. That imaginary conversation felt more real than the actual one. This is called anticipatory anxiety. Your brain simulates failure before it happens, then reacts as if it already did. On those silent days, English didn't feel like a language. It felt like a test I was always failing in advance. At home, silence followed me. No TV. No conversations. Just my thoughts. And thoughts grow louder when they don't meet reality. Studies show that people who avoid speaking a foreign language often believe they are worse than they actually are. The brain exaggerates mistakes when there is no feedback. Silence becomes an echo chamber. To cope, I started doing something small but important. I spoke English to myself. Not affirmations. Not motivational speeches. Just describing reality. I am making coffee. It is cold today. Simple sentences. Why does this help? Because speaking, even alone, activates language pathways without social threat. It tells your brain, this is safe. At the same time, I listened. Not actively. Not with subtitles and pausing every sentence. I let English play in the background. Podcasts. Local radio. The brain absorbs rhythm before meaning. Babies don't understand words at first. They understand melody. Linguists call this prosody. By letting English flow without pressure, my brain slowly stopped treating it as danger. Then came a turning point, small but powerful. One afternoon, someone asked me a simple question. How's your day going? Normally, I would answer automatically, good, and escape. But that day, I paused. The silence felt long. But I answered honestly. A little quiet, but okay. The sentence wasn't perfect. But it was mine. The response I got wasn't correction. It was connection. A smile. Yeah, some days are like that. That moment rewired something. My brain expected judgment. It received empathy. According to learning psychology, this is how fear memory weakens. New experience overwrites old prediction. I realized silence itself wasn't the enemy. avoidance was. In American culture, silence is interesting. It's not always negative, but prolonged silence can create distance. People value openness, even imperfect openness. They don't expect beautiful English. They expect presence. That cultural difference matters. When you understand it, pressure drops. During those days, I also noticed how English changes depending on emotion. When people are tired, they simplify. When relaxed, they speak slower. This helped me stop chasing advanced English. I aimed for honest English. I set a rule, one imperfect sentence per interaction. That's it. No more. No less. This technique is supported by behavioral science. Small, achievable goals reduce avoidance behavior. One sentence felt safe. Manageable. Sometimes it was just, "Thank you." Sometimes, "Have a nice day." But each sentence weakened fear. I also accepted bad days. Some days, my English disappeared again. That didn't mean I was going backward. The brain doesn't learn linearly. It learns in waves. Stress lowers access. Rest restores it. Knowing this stopped me from panicking. By the end of that week, my silence changed shape. It wasn't fear silence anymore. It was listening silence. Observing silence. And that's productive silence. I learned something important during those quiet days. Your loud thoughts are not truth. They are signals. Signals that you care. Signals that something matters. When you stop fighting them and start acting gently, they quiet down. English didn't come back suddenly. It returned slowly, softly, like a voice saying, "You're allowed to try." And once you believe you're allowed to try, silence stops being a prison and becomes a pause before growth. English in daily survival. There's a moment when English stops being a subject and becomes a tool. Not a beautiful tool. Not a polished one. Just something you grab because life demands it. For me, that moment arrived quietly, standing outside a small apartment building, rereading the same sign 3 times, realizing that if I didn't understand English, I didn't move forward. I stayed stuck. Survival has a way of simplifying learning. In those early days, English followed me everywhere. Not in books. Not in apps. In errands. In decisions. In small risks. Survival English is different from classroom English because it doesn't wait for confidence. It happens first, confidence comes later. I had to find a place to live. That meant messages. Short messages. Honest messages. Is the room still available? Can I see it today? No advanced grammar. No fancy words. Just clarity. Linguists say communication efficiency matters more than accuracy in real-life contexts. And suddenly, my simple English was not a weakness. It was exactly what worked. Walking through neighborhoods, I learned English from signs.
No trespassing.
For lease. Quiet hours. These weren't vocabulary lists. These were boundaries. Rules. Safety. When language protects you, your brain pays attention. Cognitive science shows that emotionally relevant information is remembered faster. English tied to safety sticks. Then came transportation. Buses. Schedules. Delays. If you've ever stood at a bus stop in a new country, you know the feeling. You read the sign, then read it again, hoping it changes. It doesn't. So you adapt. I learned phrases like, "Is this the right bus?" And "Does this go downtown?" Short questions. Repeated daily. Repetition without boredom is the secret of fluency. Same structure. Different faces. At grocery stores, English trained my ears. Cashiers asked predictable questions. Paper or plastic? Do you need a receipt? At first, I froze. Then I realized something powerful. Predictability reduces anxiety. Once your brain recognizes patterns, it stops panicking. This is why daily life English is gold for learners. Same questions. Same rhythm. Your nervous system relaxes. I started answering before fully thinking. That's important. Fluency is not about thinking faster, it's about thinking less. When responses become automatic, cognitive load drops. My answers weren't perfect. Sometimes I said yes when I meant no. We laughed. Life moved on. Mistakes didn't break anything. That realization alone removed half my fear. Food became my teacher. Ordering taught me structure. I'll have, can I get? These phrases are survival keys in American English. Polite. Direct. Flexible. I used them everywhere. Coffee shops. Small diners. Even food trucks. Each order was a speaking exercise disguised as lunch. There's a cultural layer here too. In the US, people value efficiency mixed with friendliness. You don't need long explanations. You need clarity and tone. That helped me stop overthinking grammar. Tone carried meaning. A calm voice covered missing words. I also learned English through asking for help. Can you help me? Is one of the strongest sentences you can learn. Psychologically, asking for help reduces performance pressure. It turns communication into cooperation. And surprisingly, most people responded kindly. That kindness retrained my brain's threat system. English stopped feeling hostile. One afternoon, I needed to return something at a store. Returns involve policy language. Receipt. Original payment. Refund. I was nervous, but I listened carefully. The employee spoke slower when she saw my hesitation. That's something many Americans do instinctively. They adjust. They meet you halfway. Language is social, not competitive. That interaction taught me an important learning strategy. Listen for intent, not perfection. Even when I didn't catch every word, I understood the goal. Understanding intent is how children learn language before grammar. It's natural. We forget that as adults. At home, I reviewed the day, not by studying, but by replaying moments. What did they ask me? How did I answer? Reflection consolidates memory. Neuroscience calls this memory reconsolidation. When you revisit an experience calmly, learning deepens. I also noticed something emotional happening. Each completed task, buying food, taking a bus, paying a bill, gave me small confidence spikes. Dopamine doesn't come from big wins. It comes from progress. And progress doesn't require fluency. It requires action. My English was still basic. But it was alive. It moved. It solved problems. That's when language becomes yours. Survival English also taught me boundaries. I learned how to say, I don't understand. Not apologetically. Calmly. That sentence is powerful. It keeps conversations honest. It invites clarity. In American culture, directness is respected. Saying you don't understand is not weakness, it's communication. Over time, English stopped being something I practiced and became something I used. That shift matters. When language becomes functional, motivation stops depending on emotion. You don't ask, "Do I feel like learning English today?" You ask, "Do I want to live well today?" The answer is obvious. By the end of that period, I realized survival was the best teacher I ever had. It didn't explain grammar. It didn't give scores. It gave results. Slowly. Consistently. Humanly. English didn't save my life. But it made daily life possible. And sometimes, that's the same thing. Cultural gaps everywhere. Culture shock doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in through small moments. How people stand in line, how they say sorry, how quickly they move on after a conversation ends. By the time I noticed it, I was already inside it. And English, once again, was not just a language. It was the mirror showing me how different everything was. In the US, culture lives inside communication. Not just what people say, but how they say it, and when they stop. At first, I misunderstood silence. Back home, silence can mean respect, thinking, or emotional depth. Here, silence often means the conversation is over. Not angry. Not cold. Just complete. That confused me. I kept waiting for more words that never came. This cultural gap made my English feel weaker than it actually was. I thought I missed something. I thought I didn't understand. But often, there was nothing to understand. The interaction had simply ended. Sociolinguists call this pragmatic difference. Same language, different social rules. Once I learned that, my anxiety dropped fast. Another shock was friendliness without obligation. People smiled, chatted briefly, then disappeared from my life without explanation. In many cultures, warmth signals long-term connection. In American culture, warmth often signals politeness in the moment. This matters for English learners because we attach emotional meaning to words. When expectations clash, disappointment follows. I remember thinking, did I say something wrong? No. I just expected continuity where none was promised. That realization saved my confidence. English itself changes with culture. Americans value clarity and efficiency. Long explanations can feel uncomfortable. This pushed me to shorten my sentences. Not because I couldn't say more, but because saying less worked better. This is an important lesson for learners. Effective English is not advanced English. It's appropriate English. At work-like environments, people go straight to the point. What do you need? Not rude. Functional. My brain initially translated that as coldness. But culturally, it meant respect for time. Once I reframed it, conversations felt easier. Tone mattered more than length. One cultural gap that affected my English deeply was the idea of personal space, physical and verbal. Americans don't usually interrupt. They wait. That sounds polite, but for a non-native speaker, it creates pressure. The silence feels like a test. Are you done? Are you thinking? Are you confused? I learned to fill that space slowly. Let me think. Give me a second. These phrases are cultural tools. They protect your time. They signal intention. Without them, silence becomes awkward. With them, silence becomes accepted. Another difference showed up in humor. Sarcasm is common but subtle. At first, I took things literally. That made me feel behind. But humor comprehension comes later in language learning. Even linguists agree. Understanding jokes requires deep cultural knowledge. I stopped chasing it. I focused on tone and context. Laugh when others laugh. It's okay to ask later. Food culture also taught me English. People talk about diets, preferences, allergies, openly. I don't eat that. I'm gluten-free. Direct.
No he pas allergie.
That honesty surprised me. It taught me a new kind of sentence structure, clear boundaries without explanation. That's powerful language. In relationships, cultural gaps become sharper. Emotional expression in the US often uses simple words. I feel stressed. I need space. Not poetic, but effective. I learned that expressing feelings doesn't require complex vocabulary. It requires courage and timing. That changed how I used English emotionally. Psychologically, culture shock drains mental energy. Studies show it reduces language performance temporarily. Knowing this helped me stop blaming myself. I wasn't getting worse at English. I was adapting. Adaptation looks messy before it looks smooth. I started observing more than speaking. How people greet. How they end conversations. How they disagree politely. I see your point, but that phrase became gold. It's a bridge between honesty and respect. Cultural fluency lives in these small connectors. I also noticed Americans appreciate self-awareness. Saying my English isn't perfect often relaxed conversations. It set expectations. It invited patience. This isn't necessary, but it helped me feel safer. Safety improves fluency. Always. One night, I reflected on how culture had reshaped my learning. Back home, English felt academic. Here, it felt social, emotional, contextual. And culture was the grammar book I never studied. By accepting cultural gaps instead of fighting them, my English started flowing more naturally. I stopped translating social rules. I started absorbing them. Slowly. Imperfectly. Culture doesn't block language. It carries it. Once you understand that, English stops feeling foreign and starts feeling local. And that's when you realize you're not just learning English anymore. You're learning how to belong, one small interaction at a time. Love appears unexpectedly. Love never waits for you to feel ready. Especially not in a new country, with broken routines and unfinished sentences. It appears quietly, almost inconveniently, right in the middle of your confusion. That's what happened to me. I wasn't looking for romance. I was looking for stability, for familiar sounds, for English that didn't make my heart race. And somehow, love walked in speaking the same imperfect language I was learning. We met in an ordinary moment.
No dramatic setup.
Just a shared space, shared time, and shared awkward pauses. At first, I thought my English would ruin everything. Love, after all, feels like the final exam of communication. You don't just exchange information. You exchange emotions, intentions, vulnerability. And when your language feels fragile, vulnerability feels risky. Our conversations were slow, painfully slow. Short sentences, long pauses. Sometimes gestures replaced words. Sometimes silence did the work. But something interesting happened. The slower we spoke, the more present we became. Psychologists talk about emotional attunement, the ability to sense another person's feelings beyond words. Limited language forced us into that space. We listened harder, watched facial expressions, felt tone. In a strange way, my imperfect English became an advantage. I couldn't hide behind clever phrases or emotional shortcuts. Everything I said had to be honest and simple. I like being here. I feel nervous. I don't know the right word. Those sentences are basic, but they are emotionally accurate. And accuracy builds trust. In American culture, dating often values clarity. People appreciate knowing where you stand. That helped me. I didn't need poetic language. I needed intention. Studies on intercultural relationships show that misunderstandings decrease when partners prioritize explicit communication. Saying how you feel matters more than saying it beautifully. There were misunderstandings, of course. Cultural ones. Language ones. Sometimes I took casual words seriously. Sometimes jokes passed over my head. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I learned to ask, "What do you mean?" That question became a bridge. Asking doesn't weaken attraction. It deepens it. It shows engagement. One evening, we talked about family, about backgrounds, about expectations. These are heavy topics even in your native language. In English, they felt heavier. But again, simplicity saved me. I didn't explain everything. I explained what mattered. Family is important to me. I want stability. Clear values travel well across languages. Love also changed my motivation to learn English. Before, English was survival. Now, it was connection. Neuroscience shows that emotional relevance accelerates learning. When language becomes tied to affection, memory strengthens. Words stick because they carry feeling. Suddenly, I remembered phrases easily. Not because I studied them, but because they were used in moments that mattered. We texted in English. Short messages. Real ones. No pressure to be perfect. Texting helped because it allowed time. I could think. Choose words. Edit lightly. Over time, speed increased naturally. Writing supported speaking. This is a powerful learning loop many learners overlook. There were moments of insecurity. I worried my English made me less attractive. That fear is common. But attraction isn't about fluency. It's about presence. About effort. About how you respond when you don't understand. Emotional intelligence doesn't require advanced vocabulary. I noticed something else. In American relationships, emotional honesty is often expressed directly. I need space. I feel overwhelmed. At first, this felt blunt, but it reduced guessing games. I learned to mirror that style. My English became more functional emotionally. I stopped decorating feelings. I named them. Love also exposed my listening gaps. Emotional conversations require careful listening, not just to words, but to what's underneath. I learned to listen for key phrases, tone shifts, pauses. Listening is the most underrated language skill in relationships. When you listen well, your speaking doesn't need to be perfect. There was a moment when I realized something had changed. I was no longer translating in my head. I was responding. Slowly, yes. Imperfectly, yes. But naturally. That's when English stopped being a barrier between us and became the path itself. From a learning perspective, this is important. Language acquisition improves when learners feel emotionally safe. Love creates safety. Safety reduces fear. Reduced fear improves fluency. It's not romantic theory. It's neuroscience. Love didn't fix my English, but it gave it purpose. And purpose fuels consistency. I wanted to understand better. Speak clearer. Not for exams. Not for approval. But to connect. In the middle of a new city, new culture, and new life, love didn't distract me from learning English. It anchored me to it. It reminded me that language is not about sounding smart. It's about being understood. Sometimes, love shows up not to complete your life, but to help you practice becoming yourself in a new language. And maybe that's the most human way to learn English there is. Language inside relationships. There's a moment in every relationship when words stop being optional. When silence doesn't feel safe anymore. When misunderstanding costs more than discomfort. That's when I learned something important. English inside a relationship is not about fluency. It's about responsibility. Because when emotions get involved, language stops being practice and starts being consequence. In the beginning, our conversations were light, safe, weather, food, daily routines. But relationships don't stay on the surface. They move inward. And when they do, English has to follow. That transition scared me more than ordering food or asking for directions. Talking about feelings means choosing words carefully. And when your vocabulary feels limited, you worry about choosing the wrong ones. The first conflict arrived quietly. Not an argument. Just a misunderstanding. A sentence said too directly. A pause interpreted incorrectly. Cultural habits collided with language gaps. I felt my chest tighten, not because of anger, but because I couldn't explain myself fast enough. Psychologists call this emotional flooding. When emotions rise, language access drops. That's why arguments in a second language feel harder than they should. I noticed something about American communication during conflict. People value clarity over implication. Saying what you feel matters more than hinting. In many cultures, indirectness protects harmony. Here, indirectness often creates confusion. That difference changed how I used English. Instead of searching for perfect sentences, I started naming emotions simply. I feel confused. I feel hurt. I didn't mean that. These are not advanced sentences, but they are emotionally accurate. And accuracy builds trust faster than elegance. One powerful realization changed everything. Relationships don't require perfect English, they require repair. Repair means noticing when something goes wrong and addressing it. Language is just the vehicle. Research in relationship psychology shows that successful couples focus less on winning arguments and more on restoring connection. English became my repair tool. There were moments when I didn't understand her emotions fully. Not because she wasn't clear, but because emotional vocabulary is cultural. Words like space, pressure, or overwhelmed carry different weight depending on context. Instead of pretending to understand, I learned to ask follow-up questions. Can you explain? What does that mean for you? These questions slowed conversations, but they deepened them. Slowing down is underrated in relationships. Fast responses feel confident, but slow responses feel thoughtful. My English naturally slowed things down. And surprisingly, that reduced conflict. We didn't react immediately. We processed. That space helped. Marriage and long-term commitment also changed how I saw language. English was no longer just between two people. It became the bridge between families, expectations, and future plans. Talking about values, money, responsibilities, these topics require clarity. Ambiguity creates stress. I learned to prepare important conversations. Not scripts. Key points. Emotional goals. For example, I want to feel understood. I want to find a solution. This approach is supported by communication science. When you focus on intention instead of wording, conversations become less reactive. There was a night when we talked about the future. Where to live. Family. Stability. Heavy topics. My English felt small. But honesty filled the gaps. I didn't explain everything. I explained what mattered. I want a calm life. I value family. Simple sentences. Big meaning. Listening became my strongest skill. In relationships, listening does most of the work. When you listen well, you reduce the need to speak perfectly. I watched tone changes, facial expressions, pauses, Nonverbal cues often carry more truth than words. Linguists agree. Communication is mostly nonverbal. That realization took pressure off my English. I also learned that American relationships value boundaries. Saying "I need time" or "I'm not ready to talk" is normal. Respectful. Healthy. Learning these phrases gave me emotional safety. Boundaries reduce conflict by preventing overload. English wasn't limiting me. It was teaching me healthier patterns. There were moments of frustration too, when I wished I could express myself more deeply, more poetically. But then I realized something important. Depth doesn't come from vocabulary size. It comes from consistency. Showing up. Clarifying. Apologizing when needed. Apologies were another lesson. In American culture, apologizing doesn't always mean admitting guilt. It often means acknowledging impact. "I'm sorry you felt that way." Understanding this reduced tension. Language carries cultural meaning beyond grammar. Over time, English stopped feeling like an obstacle in the relationship and started feeling like shared ground. We built our communication style together. Hybrid. Patient. Honest. That's how language becomes intimate. From a learning perspective, relationships create high-quality language input. Emotional conversations activate memory strongly. Words learned in emotional contexts are remembered longer. That's neuroscience. English tied to love, conflict, and resolution sticks. I didn't become fluent through romance. But my English became human. Responsive. Alive. It learned to hold emotion without collapsing. Relationships don't require perfect communication. They require effort, repair, and presence. English was just the tool, but using it changed me. When language enters relationships, it stops being about sounding right and starts being about showing up right. And that's a much better reason to keep learning. Family, children, reality check. There's a point in life when English stops being personal and starts being generational. When it's no longer just about you ordering coffee or expressing feelings, but about the future you're quietly building. For me, that realization arrived when the conversation shifted from us to family, from now to later, from comfort to responsibility. That's when English stopped being optional. Thinking about family in the US changes everything. Suddenly, language is not a skill, it's infrastructure. It holds schools, doctors, paperwork, parent-teacher meetings, bedtime stories, and hard conversations you don't get to avoid. When children enter the picture, English becomes the air they breathe. And if you can't breathe it with them, distance grows quietly. I remember walking past a playground one afternoon. Children were laughing, arguing, negotiating rules for a game, all in fast, natural English. No fear. No translation. Their parents stood nearby, casually talking about schedules, school districts, after-school programs. That scene hit me harder than any grammar test ever could. This wasn't about fluency. This was about access. Psychologists talk about anticipatory responsibility, the stress we feel before responsibility arrives. I felt it deeply. I wasn't a parent yet, but my mind was already asking, will I understand my child's teacher? Can I advocate for them? Can I explain the world in English when life gets complicated? In the US, family life runs on communication. Forms, emails, app notifications from schools, doctor's instructions, safety guidelines. These are not advanced English, but they are precise English. Misunderstanding here has consequences. That realization reframed my motivation overnight. I started paying attention to how parents spoke. They didn't use complex language. They used clear, calm sentences. Are you feeling okay? We need to talk. Tell me what happened. These are emotional sentences. Functional sentences. The kind that build trust. That's when I understood, English for family is not academic. It's relational. Culture plays a role too. American parenting emphasizes communication with children, explaining rules instead of just enforcing them. That requires language, patience, listening. Children are encouraged to speak up, ask questions, express feelings. If you don't understand their words, you miss their world. From a language learning perspective, this creates a powerful insight. Children don't need perfect parents, they need present ones. Present means listening, responding, clarifying. English doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be available. I imagined future moments. A child coming home upset. A teacher requesting a meeting. A doctor explaining treatment options. These scenarios activated something deeper than fear. Purpose. Neuroscience shows that long-term motivation increases when learning connects to identity and values. English became tied to who I wanted to be, not just what I wanted to achieve. I also noticed how families here talk about balance, work-life boundaries, mental health, emotional well-being. These conversations happen openly, and in English. Words like burnout, support, needs are common. Understanding them matters. Using them matters. They shape family dynamics. Another reality check came through policies that affect families. School enrollment rules. Healthcare systems. Community resources. You don't need political English. You need practical English. Reading forms. Asking questions. Clarifying options. This is survival English at a higher level. Not harder. Just more precise. I started reading school websites, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the language families live in. I listened to how parents spoke to teachers. Respectful, direct, collaborative. That tone became my model. There's also the emotional side of raising children in a second language. Many immigrants worry their children will drift away culturally. Language plays a big role in that fear. But I realized something important. Connection matters more than shared fluency. Children can translate words. They can't translate presence. So I focused on what I could control. Learning emotional vocabulary. Practicing listening. Being comfortable saying, "Can you explain that to me?" Modeling curiosity instead of perfection. That's a powerful lesson for children too. Research shows that children of non-native speakers develop strong communication skills when parents model learning openly. When kids see adults ask questions and make mistakes, they learn resilience. English learning becomes a shared journey, not a gap. Family also changes time perception. You don't cram learning. You integrate it. English becomes part of routines. Reading signs. Watching shows together. Talking about daily life. Slow. Natural. Consistent. That's when I understood something deeply comforting. I don't need to finish learning English before family life begins. English will grow with the family. Through bedtime conversations, school notes, shared jokes, shared worries. The reality check wasn't scary anymore. It was grounding. It showed me why slow, daily English matters. Why listening matters. Why emotional clarity matters. English is not just how you survive in America. It's how you show up for the people you love. And when language becomes love in action, learning stops feeling heavy and starts feeling necessary in the best possible way. Policy shock and growth. There's a moment when you realize that life in the US is not just cultural, it's procedural. Everything works, but everything also asks something from you. Forms, rules, policies, emails that look simple but carry consequences. This was the phase when English stopped being emotional or social and became structural. And honestly, this part scared me more than conversations or relationships ever did. Policy shock doesn't hit like culture shock. It doesn't feel confusing at first. It feels quiet, administrative, neutral, until you misunderstand one sentence, and suddenly you're late, unqualified, or responsible for something you didn't expect. That's when I understood, in America, English is not only how you connect. It's how you protect yourself. The first time I encountered this was through paperwork. Simple documents. Short sentences. But dense meaning. Required. Deadline. Failure to comply. These words are not advanced vocabulary, but they carry weight. Missing their meaning doesn't cause embarrassment, it causes real problems. This shifted how my brain treated English overnight. From a psychological perspective, this is called consequence-based learning. When outcomes matter, attention increases. My reading speed slowed down. Not because I was weak, but because I was careful. Carefulness is a skill. English required it now. Policies shape daily life in the U.S. healthcare, housing, employment, education. Each system has its own language. Not complicated, but precise. I noticed Americans ask clarifying questions freely. What does this include? Can you explain this part? That behavior taught me something crucial. Understanding policy is not about intelligence. It's about permission to ask. I used to hesitate before asking questions. I didn't want to look slow. But in policy-driven environments, silence is risk. Questions are safety tools. Once I reframed questions as responsibility instead of weakness, my confidence changed. I remember reading a lease agreement. Not long. Just detailed. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to know what mattered. Terms about notice periods, maintenance responsibilities, penalties. I looked up words, not to memorize them, but to understand the system. English became context-based again. This is where many English learners give up. They think, my English isn't good enough for this. But the truth is, policies are written for average people, not language experts. They are meant to be readable. The challenge is not language complexity, it's unfamiliar structure. I started noticing patterns. Policies repeat phrases. You may. You must. You are responsible for. Once you recognize these patterns, comprehension improves quickly. Pattern recognition is a core skill in language acquisition. The brain loves repetition. Another growth moment came through digital communication. Emails from institutions. Short. Formal. Direct. No emotion. No explanation. That tone felt cold at first. But it wasn't personal. It was efficient. Understanding that stopped me from overthinking. In American systems, tone is often neutral to avoid ambiguity. That neutrality protects everyone. Once I understood that, I stopped reading emotion into policy language. I focused on action. I also learned the importance of documentation. Save emails. Confirm appointments. Follow instructions exactly. This isn't about being anxious, it's about operating smoothly. English here isn't expressive. It's operational. From a learning standpoint, this phase strengthened my reading skills more than any textbook. Real documents. real stakes, real feedback. When I misunderstood something, I corrected it fast. The brain learns quickly when feedback is immediate. Policy shock also changed my relationship with spoken English. Phone calls became important. Calling offices. Confirming information. Asking for clarification. Phone English is hard. No visual cues. But it's powerful. I prepared before calling. Wrote key questions. That preparation reduced anxiety. I noticed Americans appreciate clear, direct questions. You don't need long explanations. You need accuracy. This helped me simplify my speaking style even more. Less decoration. More intention. There's also a cultural expectation of personal responsibility. Systems assume you read. You ask. You follow up. English enables that responsibility. It doesn't guarantee success, but without it, success is harder. This phase matured my English mindset. I stopped chasing fluency as an abstract goal. I focused on functional competence. Can I understand what's required? Can I respond appropriately? Can I protect my interests? Growth came not from confidence, but from consistency. Reading a little every day. Asking when unsure. Accepting that misunderstanding is part of learning, but ignoring misunderstanding is dangerous. By the end of this phase, English felt heavier, but also stronger. It carried weight, authority, responsibility. That changed how I respected it. Policy shock didn't discourage me. It disciplined me. It taught me that English is not just how you express yourself, it's how you navigate systems built on clarity. And once you learn to navigate systems, you stop feeling like a guest in the country, and start feeling like a participant. That's real growth. Learning English the slow way. At some point, I stopped trying to learn English faster, and everything started working better. Not dramatically. Not overnight. Quietly. That was the turning point. I realized that speed was never the problem. Pressure was. And pressure is the fastest way to make your brain shut down. The slow way doesn't look impressive from the outside.
No intensive schedules.
No perfect streaks. No feeling of "I crushed it today." But inside the brain, something different happens. Neuroscience shows that slow, consistent exposure creates stronger neural connections than rushed memorization. Your brain prefers rhythm over force. English is no exception. I began to structure my learning around daily life, not around goals. Listening while walking. Reading signs without translating every word. Speaking when needed, resting when tired. This removed the emotional roller coaster. Motivation stopped spiking and crashing. It stabilized. One key shift was how I listened. I stopped trying to understand everything. I listened for anchors, familiar words, repeated phrases, tone. This is called top-down listening. Instead of decoding every sound, your brain predicts meaning based on context. Native speakers do this naturally. Learners can train it. I also slowed down my speaking on purpose. Not apologetically. Intentionally. Slower speech gives your brain time to organize thoughts. Studies in second language acquisition show that controlled speaking improves accuracy and confidence simultaneously. Speed comes later, as a side effect. Reading changed too. I stopped reading to learn English and started reading to understand life. Short texts, emails, notices, articles about daily topics, weather, health, family, policy, relevance matters. When content connects to your life, comprehension improves, even if vocabulary is limited. I noticed that repetition showed up naturally. The same phrases appeared everywhere. Let me know. It depends. That makes sense. These phrases became automatic, not because I memorized them, but because I lived with them. This is how children learn language. Through frequency, not explanation. The slow way also respects the nervous system. When stress is high, learning is low. I paid attention to my body. If I felt tense, I listened only. If I felt calm, I spoke more. Emotional regulation became part of language learning. That's something most courses ignore. I created small rituals. Morning, listen to real English for 10 minutes.
No subtitles. No stopping.
Evening, reflect briefly. What did I hear today? What did I say? Reflection consolidates memory. It tells your brain, this matters. I didn't track progress by test scores. I tracked it by friction. Did conversations feel slightly easier? Did I hesitate less? Did I recover faster after mistakes? These are real metrics. And they improved. One powerful habit was repeating sentences out loud. Not many, just a few. Sentences I actually heard that day. This builds muscle memory. Speaking is physical. Tongue, jaw, breath. Repetition trains the body, not just the mind. I also accepted plateaus. Weeks where nothing seemed to change. Research shows plateaus are consolidation phases. The brain reorganizes quietly before the next improvement. Panicking during plateaus interrupts the process. Trusting them accelerates it. Another key element of the slow way is identity. I stopped calling myself bad at English. I became someone learning English through life. Identity shapes behavior. When learning becomes who you are, not what you struggle with, consistency becomes natural. I used English to think, not just to communicate. Simple thoughts. This is interesting. I need time. Thinking in English reduces translation load. It doesn't require full sentences, just presence. Mistakes lost their emotional weight. They became data, feedback, information. The slow way treats errors as signals, not failures. That mindset change alone unlocked more speaking than any technique ever did. From an SEO perspective, this matters because millions search for how to learn English naturally, real English practice, slow English listening, and learn English through stories. The answer is not speed. It's alignment with how the brain actually learns. By this stage, English felt less like an obstacle and more like a companion. Still imperfect. Still growing. But reliable. I could depend on it. The slow way doesn't promise fast results. It promises lasting ones. And when you're building a life, not passing a test, that's the only promise that matters. English learned slowly doesn't disappear under stress. It stays. It adapts. It becomes yours. And once you experience that, you stop asking, how fast can I learn? You start asking, how deeply can I live in this language? From zero to confidence. Confidence doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself with perfect sentences or flawless pronunciation. It shows up quietly, almost shyly, when you realize you're no longer afraid of starting. 2 weeks ago, I arrived in this city with English that worked only in my head. Now, something had changed. Not dramatically, but deeply. The biggest shift wasn't linguistic. It was psychological. I stopped asking myself, is my English good enough? And started asking, can I move forward with what I have? That question changed everything. According to behavioral psychology, confidence is not built by success. It's built by survival. When you survive situations you thought you couldn't handle, your brain updates its self-image. I began noticing small wins. Not achievements, wins. Ordering without rehearsing. Answering unexpected questions. Understanding jokes without translating every word. These moments didn't feel exciting at the time, but they stacked quietly. Confidence is cumulative. What surprised me most was that my English didn't suddenly become better. My tolerance did. I tolerated pauses, mistakes, confusion. That tolerance reduced anxiety. Reduced anxiety improved performance. It's a feedback loop researchers call the confidence-competence cycle. You don't wait to feel confident to act. You act, survive, and confidence follows. One afternoon, I realized I had stopped apologizing for my English. That habit had been automatic. Sorry, my English, But now I just spoke. Not arrogantly. Naturally. This matters culturally too. In American communication, excessive apology can signal insecurity. Dropping it subtly shifted how people responded to me. Conversations felt more balanced. Another marker of confidence appeared in my listening. I stopped panicking when I didn't understand everything. I listened for meaning, not perfection. When needed, I asked for clarification calmly. Can you say that again?
Norrus. Noscham.
That sentence alone unlocked more understanding than hours of silent guessing ever did. I also noticed my internal voice had softened. It no longer attacked me for mistakes. It became practical. Try again. That's okay. Self-talk matters. Studies show that compassionate self-talk improves learning outcomes significantly. Confidence grows in a supportive mental environment. 2 weeks isn't enough to master a language. But it's enough to change your relationship with it. English stopped being the enemy. It became a partner. Sometimes clumsy. Sometimes helpful. But always there. I reflected on how far I'd come, not by measuring vocabulary, but by measuring fear. Fear had shrunk. And when fear shrinks, possibility expands. I was more willing to start conversations. More willing to stay in them. More willing to express needs. Confidence also changed how I learned. I stopped consuming content passively. I interacted, commented, asked, responded. Engagement accelerates learning. That's backed by cognitive science. Active use strengthens neural pathways more than passive exposure. I began thinking about the future, not with pressure, but with curiosity. How much more could English open? Work opportunities. Deeper relationships. Community involvement. Confidence doesn't guarantee success, but it invites it. One important realization grounded me. Confidence is not constant. Some days, it faded. Stress returned. Words disappeared. That didn't mean failure. It meant I was human. Confidence is a baseline that rises over time, not a permanent state. I stopped comparing myself to others. Comparison kills confidence. Everyone's timeline is different. My journey was mine, shaped by climate, culture, love, responsibility. That context matters. It gives meaning to progress. From an SEO and learner perspective, many people search for how to gain confidence speaking English or real English confidence. The answer is not more study. It's more lived experience, with safety, reflection, and patience. By the end of the second week, I could say this honestly, I wasn't fluent. But I was capable. And capability is the foundation of confidence. Once you believe you can handle what comes next, language stops controlling you. Starting from zero didn't make me weak. It stripped me down to essentials. And from there, confidence grew, not as a performance, but as a quiet readiness to begin again. Confidence is not the end of the journey. It's permission to continue. A fresh start, a happy end. There's a quiet moment that arrives after struggle, when nothing dramatic changes, but everything feels lighter. That was the ending of my first 2 weeks in this new American city. Not a movie ending. Not fireworks. Just a morning where I woke up, checked the weather in English, answered a message without overthinking, and realized something important. I wasn't starting from zero anymore. I was starting from experience. A fresh start doesn't erase difficulty. It reframes it. The city was still unfamiliar. My English was still imperfect. Climate still changed its mind daily. Policies still required attention. But inside me, something had settled. I no longer felt like I was chasing English. I was living with it. Psychologically, this matters. Researchers call it narrative closure. Not the end of a story, but the moment when meaning becomes clear. When hardship stops feeling random and starts feeling purposeful. That's what happened. The fear, the silence, the misunderstandings, the slow learning, all of it connected into one story. And that story had a happy ending, not because everything was solved, but because I had changed. I noticed how love, language, and life blended together naturally. Conversations felt warmer. Misunderstandings felt fixable. English no longer stood between me and connection. It became the bridge. Simple words carried real meaning. I'm here. I understand. Let's try. Those sentences are small, but they hold a future. From a learning perspective, this is the most powerful phase. When language stops being the center of your attention and becomes the background of your life. Linguists agree that true acquisition happens when learners focus on meaning, not form. I wasn't thinking about grammar anymore. I was thinking about living. I thought about marriage, about family, about building something stable in a place that once felt foreign. These thoughts didn't scare me anymore. English didn't feel like a barrier to those dreams. It felt like a path, still long but walkable. The happy ending wasn't about fluency. It was about courage. Courage to speak before feeling ready. Courage to ask questions. Courage to learn slowly. Courage to start from zero without shame. That courage compounds. It builds confidence quietly. I also realized something comforting. This ending wasn't permanent. It was a checkpoint. A pause before the next chapter. And that's good. Life doesn't end stories. It continues them. For anyone listening to this story to practice real English, slow English, life-based English, This is the lesson I want you to keep. You don't need perfect pronunciation to start a new life. You don't need advanced vocabulary to build love, family, or belonging. You need presence, patience, and permission to be imperfect. This story could have happened anywhere. But it happened in the US, shaped by climate differences, cultural gaps, policies, relationships, and daily survival. That context matters, because it shows that English is not learned in isolation. It's learned inside life. From an SEO lens, millions search for real English story, learn English through life, slow English practice, and start over in America. This story is not a shortcut. It's a mirror. It reflects what learning really looks like when it's human. The happy ending is this: I didn't become someone else to live here. I didn't erase my past. I added a language to my life. And that language didn't change who I am. It expanded who I can be. Fresh starts are not about forgetting the old version of you. They're about trusting that the next version doesn't need to be perfect. So if you're standing at your own zero, new city, new language, new fear, remember this. Zero is not emptiness. Zero is space. Space to build. Space to grow. Space to begin honestly. English will meet you there. Slowly. Kindly. One real moment at a time. And when you look back, you won't remember every word you learned. You'll remember the life you lived while learning them. That's a happy ending worth starting from 04. Sometimes, learning English doesn't change your accent first. It changes your courage. If you're still here, it means a part of you hasn't given up. A part of you still believes that starting from zero is not the end, it's the beginning of something honest. This channel is not about perfect grammar. It's about real English, real life, real emotions. Learned slowly, through stories that feel like yours. In the next videos, I'll share more true stories in the US, more slow, clear English listening practice, more life lessons hidden inside everyday conversations. So you can learn English without pressure, without fear, and without quitting. If this story touched you, don't watch alone. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. Like the video to tell YouTube this kind of real English matters. Leave a comment. Where are you starting from zero right now? Because your English journey isn't over. It's just getting honest. And the next story might sound even more like your own.